Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Toilets and Titles. My name is Justin Stevens, and we're here for another redraft rankings episode. So you guys are all starting to get out of that dynasty mentality with your dynasty startups and your dynasty rookie drafts are all behind you. We're all starting to steer a little bit more towards redraft, which is where most of us began in fantasy football. So it's kind of where our hearts usually fall back onto, especially me. I'm more of a redraft guy. And as usual here lately, we've had Mark on for all but I think one of these episodes. Mark, here you had a great weekend, won an awesome prize.
I did. It was my birthday weekend. I had a golf tournament. Won a Yeti cooler at the golf tournament. It was a good weekend.
Oh yeah, Yeti cooler with some prizes inside. Nothing wrong with that. Angie shot well, so my best golf score, I believe, is right around my average bowling score. So if that tells you anything, I'm either really bad at bowling or really bad at golf, but it's both. Redraft rankings for tonight's episode. But first, we want to get into a little bit of news. OTA is going on right now, all throughout the NFL across the country. So there is actually a decent bit of news. The first point that I wanted to come up to though is the Joe Burrow back at OTAs, and of course, this is a hot topic here at T2T because and honestly, it's not because my opinion is different from the guys here on the team, but it's because my opinion is different than almost every other single person in the country. So it's just me, okay? So just bear with me, and then you'll hear some more sensibility from Mark in a moment. But the Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow was quoted today after minicamp saying, whenever the injuries start to stack up, your football mortality kind of comes into the back of your mind. So that's definitely something I've thought about and something I've had to fight through. This is happening in my mind due to the severity of his most recent injuries, and especially that one to his wrist that he's dealing with right now, and knowing that it's going to potentially be something that affects his hand and his arm mobility for potentially the rest of his life, based off of the reports that I've heard from doctors that are not getting paid by the Bengals. The majority of everyone I've asked has said the exact same thing about this injury. So I'm getting total Andrew Luck type vibes from Burrow right now, and he has 275 million reasons why he could potentially retire young and call it a career. He was also quoted as saying that he should be ready by the time the season starts, which is obviously great, and I don't doubt that. I do think that he will be ready to play by the time the season starts. But then he goes on to say that it's tough to say right now when he was asked about what percent he was currently at. At this time of the year, this is where we hear players and coaches and everybody try to lie to their fan bases and say, "Oh, I'm at 90%," or "I'm ready to go," or "Everything's great." Like there's just it's all good and positive stuff. You never really hear them say it's kind of tough to say right now, and then usually when they try to kind of butter it up like that, it typically doesn't mean good things. It usually means that they come back from their injury too soon. It usually means that maybe they end up starting the season on the pup, and which again, I think he'll be ready. I just don't think he's going to be 100%. And I've been on record for saying I don't think he's ever going to be 100% again. But even if we can get a 90% Joe Burrow, he's still a talented player. Don't get me wrong. It's just going to take a big hit for our fantasy teams and a big hit for the Bengals as well. But again, this is all just my opinion. And again, that's based off of the different types of athletic doctors that I've reached out to. The two that we've had on the show on This Guy Is Fragile on Friday nights over the last couple of seasons. I've reached out to them, and it's just bad. I'd say probably 5 doctors in total. So it's none of them have high hopes at all for Joe Burrow to come back 100% ever again. But Mark, you had a different take on this whenever you watched the interviews.
Yeah, so I watched an interview. I read an article on it as well. maybe we saw the same one. Maybe it was a different article we read, but
It sounds like the same one.
yeah, but at the same time, you can come away with different outlooks
For sure.
after reading the same thing. Because the way I
Right.
took it when he was talking about his mortality and things along that line was more of how he handled last year's injuries. Like he said, he talked about how he had the mindset and he took pride in being able to fight through injuries. And
Right.
he's starting to realize that sometimes that's not always the best way to go. He was quoted with saying, whenever you fight through adversity and come out on the other side, it definitely gives you a feeling of invincibility at times. And obviously, that's not the case. So it's always a balancing act. And that's what this off season has been about for me. And he admitted that when he fought back to be back for the start of the regular season, it probably wasn't the smartest thing for him to do last year, and probably contributed to him re-aggravating the injury and some further injuries down the line. So that's kind of what I took out of it, I took out that he has an off-season program completely planned out, and he said he doesn't need to be full bore right now. And I think that's where he was going with the I don't know where I'm at right now, because he's saying he doesn't need to be ready to go in June. He needs to be there for September through February and to make sure he's out there playing it in February. The last quote was he was built for it. Our team is built for it. And people that I have surrounded myself with have been through it with me as well. And I'm excited about the season. I'm excited what we're going to do this season. And I'm excited what we have in the locker room. So to me, I don't have the vibes where he's questioning his career. He's questioning whether he wants to play football again. I think he's just questioning, I'm not the kid I used to be. And sometimes I have to play smart and do what's best for the team.
Yeah, and like I said, that's how the majority of the country is looking at that interview, and you're probably more correct than I am. But I'm just, I'm jaded with the whole Andrew Luck thing, but not just Andrew Luck. Like, there's been several players that I've followed closely that had good, promising careers that that left early, especially through Indianapolis, due to injuries like this piling up. And you just hate to see it happen. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope that we get to see Joe Burrow play for another 15 years. And the reason that he still feels like that young guy is because he still looks like that young guy, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you this: as a Colts fan, was there any signs or tells to Andrew Luck? Because outside of watching the Colts every day, it was a complete shock to most people.
Just to give you an idea, that happened during a preseason game against the Cleveland Browns, if I remember correctly, and we had a redraft fantasy football draft going on at that time, and I drafted Andrew Luck in the 5th round, and then the announcement came in the 7th round. So yeah, and as a Colts fan, I was just as shocked as the rest of the world. Now looking back on it, it's, there were tells, there were signs. And if you read into some of his interviews leading up to it, especially that whole year or two before it, there were definitely tells, there were definitely signs. And then that's why everybody was scared about Darius Leonard or Shaquille Leonard towards the end of his career here in Indianapolis. And I know that he eventually went on and he played for Philadelphia last season, but even he has been a complete shell of himself since the last couple of injuries that he had, where he does not have that passion, and as soon as he has a hangnail, he misses 4 weeks. We're seeing it right now with Jonathan Taylor. He was perfectly healthy to start the season last year, but he wanted to play it safe. And they had the whole contract negotiations, which they ended up taking care of before the start of the season. He could have technically played, but they decided, you know what, we're going to put you on the PUP list because that's, I think it's because he didn't really want to push it and play. He wanted to save himself for later in the season. And then he had a small knee tweak and he missed another couple of weeks. Like, these players get to a certain point where they're making so much money that they don't have to force themselves to be back out on the field. And I don't blame them. Like, if Burrow did retire now to save himself, to save his body for the future, I wouldn't blame him at all. Like, and I wasn't even mad about the Andrew Luck thing. Like, believe it or not, I was more mad because of my fantasy football team.
Right.
But aside from that, I really wasn't mad at him. I was more mad at Schefter for breaking it without giving him the opportunity to break it himself. But I'm
Yeah.
not an Adam Schefter fan at all. But that's neither here nor there. Amari Cooper missed mini camps in search of a new deal. This is another one of those things, just a veteran missing time. He's in search of a new deal. He still has another year left on his contract, so they don't have to give him a new deal, but I'm sure they will. They want to keep him happy. Aaron Rodgers and Hassan Reddick both missing mini camps. Reddick's is because of him also looking for a new deal, but Rodgers was because of a scheduled event. He has communicated it well with the team. They knew ahead of time that he was going to miss it, and he's been at all of the involuntary stuff all season or all off season. He's been around the whole time. So both of them are subjected to a potential $50,000 fine for missing both days. But I could see Reddick possibly getting it and Rodgers not getting the fine. I don't really know how they're going to work the fine necessarily, but it sounds like neither one of them really care. But and then I think there was one more that missed training. Yeah, so Jamar Chase and T. Higgins also both looking for a new deal. Jamar was at minicamp, but Higgins, who was the one that was franchise tagged and still hasn't signed his tenure debt yet, Higgins has set out. So between all those minicamp sit outs, before we move on to the next point of news, do you have anything to add about any of those guys?
Not really. I mean, Rodgers will be ready when he wants to be, and he's kind of on his own clock there. And I don't think a lot of these players care about the money. For me, the Higgins for Chase, where Chase is showing up and Higgins isn't, I think because Higgins knows it's more important for him to get that contract first. Like he needs something before Chase does, or he's not getting nothing at all. Because when they pay Chase, they're going to give him the bag. So
Yeah.
he knows he needs to get it figured out sooner or later. And I think that's why you're seeing him sit out.
Yeah, I think it's more important for Higgins for another reason because he's about to get paid way overpaid for one season for his level of talent, in my opinion. And then in that one season, they're going to be able to see how much of a fraud he really is, and he's not going to get that big truckload. So, but obviously, he doesn't believe that. He probably still believes in himself. CMC, the new face of the cover of Madden. Do you believe in the Madden curse?
I did. I used to play Madden religiously, and they all got hurt year after year after year. And then
Crazy.
I kind of got tired of the game because it became a carbon copy of itself every single year. So I haven't followed the last few years to know if the players actually got hurt or not, because I don't really even know who was on the cover.
Yeah, so I think of like the last 6 or 8 years, it has slowed down quite a bit, but also you can also consider the Madden curse to be like they're not necessarily getting hurt as much as they didn't perform as well as they did last year. But that actually makes sense because if you're the top guy at your position or in the game, then there's nowhere else to go but down. So even if CMC, if he lost, 30% of his fantasy scoring last season, he's still a top 5 running back for fantasy. So yeah, there might be a little bit of the Madden curse if you want to look at it from that aspect. The injury part has really subsided though with the Madden curse. So I don't believe in curses and stuff like that. It was just a crazy coincidence. And then on that end, like I said, he's definitely going to see a regression because he had a career year last season. Like something's got to give. So but he could still be the running back one for fantasy purposes.
I mean, there definitely was a time back in the day where if one of your star players from your team got the Madden cover, you were like, son of a bitch.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Peyton Manning had it one year. Jared Mayo, he was labeled Jared Mayo labeled Ramondre Stevenson as one of the better backs in the league. And this is while they're still in contract talk. So he's not really good at negotiating at the table. So you'd sit across from your running back and say, hey, or tell the world, hey, he's one of the better running backs in the league. And then say, all right, how can we save money here? So I thought that was kind of funny how you decided to announce that now. But for fantasy purposes, he is in a backfield with Gibson right now, and Antonio Gibson had flares early on. He's not been a bad running back by any stretch of the imagination. Kind of the same type of running back, in my opinion, as Ramondre. So hopefully Ramondre still gets the bag there, and but if he ends up getting a very big contract at all, then we know that he's going to be the guy for fantasy purposes. They pay you, they want to use you, so we just have to wait and see on that end.
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin, another extension. He'll be with the Steelers through 2027. He's already the longest tenured coach in the NFL, and now he gets a few more years of starting off good and then ending just outside of the playoffs or in the first round of the playoffs. So good on you, Tomlin.
How do you not,
Darren
right?
Wall.
As the Steelers, you got he hasn't had a losing season yet, right?
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. Darren Waller officially retires. Like this time, he actually officially told the team. So I know he's been in the news several weeks in a row now. I think that most of that was trying to bring more notoriety to him for his music career, potentially. I don't know. But if you've watched that music video, Darren, please just stick with football at some level. Go coach somewhere or be a scout. I don't care. But yeah, so Darren Waller out, Daniel Bellinger in, or I know they drafted a rookie tight end as well because they kind of saw this coming since Waller's been saying he's going to retire. But do we like any of the Giants tight ends at this point?
Yeah, I mean the first thought would be Bellinger, right? But I believe he had a couple opportunities last season where he kind of disappointed. So I don't know if he's just going to jump in and be a top
Yeah, if I
tight end.
remember right, he started. Maybe this was the year before, but he started the season off slow. He picked up speed. He started getting better, and then he had his eye gouged out or something. Like his eye was bleeding, and he missed like half of a season because of it. And then he came back and didn't do so hot when he came back. But I believe Theo Johnson is the tight end that they drafted. There's nothing there. Jack Stoll, who played a few
Yeah.
seasons with the Eagles. Chris Manhertz, who easily could just be an offensive lineman. I think it's pretty much the only reason they have him there is to block. So there's just nothing else there. But also that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the guy for fantasy either. So we'll find out next week when we talk about our tight ends if he's even going to make our top 24. And the last bit of news: 1 year, $1.125 million for Mecole Hardman to go back to the Chiefs. Fantasy relevance here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Jets season was so disappointing, but I mean, it was the Jets with no quarterbacks, right? So it's hard to tell. When you give anybody
Yeah.
Patrick Mahomes, he can make you look good. So maybe.
Yeah. So it's only 1 year and it's only just over $1 million. They're obviously drafting him to be a backup. So I do have a thought here. I feel like with the Chiefs, obviously they have so many different wide receivers out there. Any given week, it could be that wide receiver that goes off. I feel like we know for sure Marquise Brown and Rashee Rice are going to get theirs. I mean, obviously Rice has to stay out of trouble. I doubt that he actually faces a suspension, but if he does, it's not going to be enough to warrant not drafting him. So he'll definitely be on fantasy rosters. So Rice and Marquise Brown should still get theirs. But after that, any given week, it could be pretty much anybody. I think we're going to see a lot of Sky Moore on the kickoff returns. Maybe even see Rashee Rice and Brown back there for those. I think most teams are going to avoid having their number ones back there doing kickoff returns still, but this is the type of team I think it would probably actually kind of make sense. And the reason I'm mentioning all that is because if that takes play, then there is still an opportunity for Hardman to occasionally be the guy. And in some leagues, and especially now, I've noticed I've been watching Twitter. I've been kind of listening to other podcasts here and there, and a lot of people are starting to add in points for return yards because of the new return rules, which I think could shake up a little bit. So you might start to see that in some fantasy leagues. So consider that with all these wide receivers when we're talking when you do your own personal rankings. Anything else you want to add for the news?
I was wondering if maybe they were bringing him in as some depth just in case Rashid did get suspended, and then possibly cutting him before the season even starts if he doesn't. But I think where you're going with the returns probably makes more sense of why they brought him in.
And it also makes sense too, just to be depth. It's only $1 million. Like that's nothing in the NFL, so they don't really plan on utilizing him a lot. All right.
I did want to touch the last piece of news that I didn't put on there, but one of the biggest breaking news is today was Joey Chestnut is out of the hot dog eating contest on July 4th. There's some beef going down. Pardon my pun, beef. But apparently Joey Chestnut got a sponsorship deal with a plant-based hot dog company and wanted to advertise that hot dog on the contest, which is obviously sponsored by Nathan's Hot Dogs. So they said no way, and it has resulted in him not coming to the event.
Wow. So that actually brings, some notoriety to that plant-based hot dog company.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. And honestly, I think it's good for Nathan's too, because now people are going to want to watch to see who's next.
Do you know what they were paying him a year to do that event? $200,000 a year.
To eat hot dogs.
To eat hot dogs for what, 5 minutes? Yeah.
Man, I could have been him. Oh, jeez. All right. Hey, we got a word here from our man Wicked.
Are you ready to take over your fantasy leagues and become a champion? Get the edge you need and join the Toilets to Titles Patreon today to get exclusive access to our T2T staff, weekly waiver wire shows, and Patreon exclusive leagues like our signature Frankenstank League. Members enjoy other amazing benefits such as monthly giveaways featuring autographed jerseys, collectibles, Yeti coolers, and more. Sign up now for as little as $9.99 per month and dominate your fantasy leagues like never before. Visit patreon.com/toilets to titles and let us help take your teams to the championship this season.
All right, that's at Wicked_Dynasty if you want in on his 32 league tournament. That's 32 separate individual 12-man leagues, 12-team leagues. And the winner of each of those 32 different 12-team leagues are going to go on to a 32-team tournament at the end of the fantasy season, this up-and-coming season. I believe it's like a $15 buy-in, but a potential top prize of up to $4,000 if we can fill the entire thing up. So at Wicked_Dynasty for that one. We're ready to roll here. We did our consensus overall wide receiver redraft rankings, our redraft team of myself, Mark, Coach Sheps, Nate, Wicked, and AJ. We each ranked our top 84 wide receivers and for this up and coming 2024 redraft season. Over the last several weeks, we've discussed the top 12 quarterbacks, the top 28 running backs, and we are up to number 21 for the wide receivers, which is where we're going to start tonight. So over the last several episodes, go back and watch those. You can go to the website at Toilets to Titles. Yes, not at. So it's Toilets to Titles at Gmail. No, that's our Gmail account. Toiletstotitles.com. You're going to go to toiletstotitles.com to check out all of those rankings and plus all of our wide receiver rankings once we drop them. It's important to note that these are based off of PPR redraft formats, typically one quarterback leagues. Did I miss anything there?
No, I think you got it all. Ready to get back into it.
All right, Malik Neighbors is our wide receiver 21 consensus, and this is all Wicked's fault. All right, Wicked has him ranked as his 8th best wide receiver. So I think Wicked's getting into his own stash there. Mark, you are the lowest at 29. Coach and I have him right there with you at 28. AJ and Nate are neck and neck there at 18 and 19. He was drafted 6th overall to the Giants. His first big college breakout year was at 19 years old, his second season with LSU. But he had an average my dogs. But he had an even larger breakout season at 20 years old, his second year, average over his last 2 seasons, in college was 80.5 catches, 1,289 yards, and 8.5 touchdowns per season over those last 2 seasons. That's an average weekly stat line of 6 catches, 95.5 yards, and 0.6 touchdowns. That would be 19.1 fantasy points per game, which would equal out roughly to wide receiver 6 overall, which again, that's just for shits and giggles because obviously there's no comparison. It's college football versus NFL. But remember, with Marvin Harrison Jr., he would have been the wide receiver 3 overall if we were having fun with those same numbers. I've got kind of an extensive write-up on this one that I do mostly want to get to. So, Mark, if you want to explain real quick why you were the lowest on him at 29, and then I'll explain why I was right there with you.
Well, I'll let you go because I was going to piggyback off of most of what you said and just agree with it because I only got a little to say about Neighbors. Sorry.
Gotcha. No problem. All right. So Darius Slayton was the Giants' best wide receiver last season as the wide receiver 46 overall. And this has been pretty much par for the course for Giants wide receivers since the departure of Odell Beckham Jr. The groundwork is set for Neighbors to be the guy for the Giants. And I don't even think the second place is at this position is even going to be close. He does have Daniel Jones at quarterback and an overall incompetent offense around him as well. So I don't see the Giants moving the ball downfield enough to give Neighbors many red zone targets. And I don't see Jones hitting him on a lot of deep passes. So his production will be capped. Tie that with the concerns of being a rookie, and I will want him outside of my wide receiver 2 range. Now, here's a couple of stats for you to consider. For one, no Giants team has ever produced any better than a bottom 10 season in production in passing yards since drafting Daniel Jones. Not once since Daniel Jones has been the quarterback for the Giants have they produced more passing yards than the bottom 10 in the NFL. Even with adding all the receiving success of Saquon Barkley out of the backfield, or the seasons that Saquon was injured and they had to throw the ball a ton by their standards, never once has a Daniel Jones-led team finished better than the bottom 10 in the NFL in the passing offense. That's stat number 1. Stat number 2, in the last 10 years of all rookie wide receivers whose team finished in the bottom 10 in passing yards for the season, only one finished in the top 30 in fantasy points. That was Mike Evans, and that was his rookie season. And even then, he only had 68 catches for 1,051 yards, which really isn't a whole heck of a lot in today's NFL. If you're trying to reach for a top tier wide receiver, but he just also happened to have 12 receiving touchdowns that season to get him into that top 30 range, and he was actually 29th overall, so he barely made it in there. And he had Vincent Jackson on the other side to help take off some of the coverage. Neighbors will be seeing the opposing defense's best coverage with only Darius Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson on the other side. But even Mike Evans had to get 12 touchdowns to get into that top 30. There is no way that this Giants offense will be good enough to even produce 8 touchdowns for Neighbors, in my opinion. So that's why I have him ranked so low. And honestly, by all those numbers I said, he should be outside the top 30. But I do think that Neighbors is good enough that he's going to help Daniel Jones to produce finally a non-bottom 10 production and passing, but it's still going to be pretty darn low. It's not going to be world breaking, and again, with all the rest of the offense being incompetent, they're not going to get the touchdowns. So that's why I did give him a little bit of a bump up to 27. But all right, Mark, go ahead.
So yeah, you're spot on with what I was thinking on the whole situation. Where am I ranking at? So any other draft class, Neighbors is the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver or running back off the board in your fantasy rookie drafts. He just happened to be in the same class as Marvin Harrison. But
Right.
The ranking is just like you said. It comes out of having no idea, or I mean, I guess we do have an idea of what we're going to get out of Daniel Jones and the Giants. It's going to be bad. You just went into perfect detail of how bad it actually was these past few seasons.
Yeah.
They downgraded at running back, got rid of Saquon. They brought in Singletary. I think that's a clear-cut downgrade. Last year, Pro Football Focus had him ranked as the worst offensive line in the league. And in my eyes, they did nothing or very little to nothing to improve it. So I just don't see where he's going to have the opportunities to even be in the wide receiver 2 ranking.
Yeah, very good. All right, we've beaten that dead horse. So we are on to wide receiver number 22, Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. 9th most red zone targets. Even with missing 5 games, he still had the 9th most red zone targets in the NFL. 23rd in fantasy points per game with 13.7. He played in 12 games, finishing as the wide receiver 40 overall. I do want to say that 13.7 fantasy points per game does include the games where he left early with an injury. So he probably would have been a little bit better than that, but still finishing 23rd overall. You're getting older. There's still that chance of injury. Wide receiver 40 overall last season, and I'm the highest on him at 16. And honestly, I was kind of surprised at that. I kind of wanted to bump him up in my stats just to be closer to mid on him, because I kind of felt like the highest was going to be 10 to 12. And I wanted to be kind of more in the middle there with a chance to get him in redraft. This makes me feel good thinking that I'm probably going to get him in a lot of leagues. You're the lowest at 31, so you can explain why I'm an idiot in a moment. But Wicked was right there with me, right behind me at 17, AJ at 20, Nate at 23, which is the closest to our consensus. Coach was right next to him at 24. So you are 7 spots behind the next worst, and I'm the highest. So this will be interesting. So for me, we all want Kupp to be Kupp again, but alas, unless there is an injury to Puka, then he will never get that kind of aggressive opportunity share that he had in each of the seasons where he finishes a top-notch wide receiver in points per game, that is. In the seasons that he had a viable wide receiver on the other side taking a large target share, he has finished as the wide receiver 23 and 30 in fantasy points per game. If there is a shining light, it's that Kupp started off the season missing the first 4 weeks and never really looked right all season. He should be able to outperform his wide receiver 23 performance in points per game he had last season just by being 100% healthy, but probably not by much. Also, if some teams choose to treat Puka as their number 1 and try to shut him down, then that maybe helps have some peak games where he gets more than just the 1 touchdown or more than 125 yards and a touchdown. And that upside of the high-end wide receiver 1 is now back in play. And should Puka get injured, then the sky's the limit for Kupp to be right back up there. And this is all why it makes him an ideal wide receiver 2 for me. But you, my man, are the Rams fan, so I'm going to defer and find out why I'm wrong.
So honestly, I'm shocked I'm the lowest here, which tells me I need to monitor where he's going a little more closely, because I do want to be on Kupp this year. But his ADP, as of right now, according to Sleeper, he's the 37th wide receiver going off the board. So my ranking, I do have him above the current ADP according to Sleeper. For me, with Kupp, it all comes down to staying healthy, and not just staying healthy enough to be on the field, but being healthy enough to be Cooper Kupp. A lot of the games last year, I was watching the games, and he's almost out there it looked like he was almost out there as a decoy for Puka. So, and you couldn't tell me that he was running the routes the way we're typically used to him seeing. So, but with all that being said, I'm hoping you're not the norm at 16, and I'm hoping he's more around the mid 20s, because if I can get him around there for a guy who not only 2 seasons ago was the number 1 overall player in fantasy, like I'll do that all day long, because when you're looking at risk versus potential reward, it's like so far in the green, there's no question about it. It's all going to come down to his health, if he can manage that throughout the season. And I do think he has potential, even with Puka there, to get a lot of volume, because Stafford, we've seen he likes to ride the hot hand. And I mean, we saw it We saw it with Cup. We saw it with Beckham towards the end of that one season where he was catching a touchdown almost every game towards the last 5 games of the season. It's just who he's comfortable with at that current moment and who's getting open. So, I mean, to me, again, it all comes down to health. And where I'm seeing him go in drafts right now, like I'm drafting him all day long. But again, I was shocked I was the lowest because it seems the general consensus to the public is like he's just old now and he's done.
So one thing you have to keep in mind with these early ADPs that you're seeing across all platforms is these are this is typically the time of the year where people are just now starting to kind of wake up from their football hibernation, and they still have fresh in their mind what they saw at the end of the year last year. They haven't taken the time to really process all of the other wide receivers and all of the situations across the board, and they just see Puka's the next big deal, and Cup is on his way out the door. Like they haven't had time to process other information from other people and from podcasts. So that's why, in my mind, you're seeing that the guys on our team are so much higher on him because he's going to go up on ADP by the time drafts hit, because people are going to start considering all this. We're going to see one hot video of him catching some crazy one-handed catch in practice, and everybody's going to be like, "Oh, Cup is back," and he's going to shoot up and skyrocket in ADP. So that's just something to consider on the ADP front. I do think that that's going to level off. So if you want a piece of him, you'll have to rank him a little bit higher. But hopefully you don't have to. Hopefully you, like you said, hopefully you can get him around 20, 25, and get a high end wide receiver 2 value out of him.
Yeah, and what you were talking about with the ADP is another reason there's a lot of potential benefit in doing these best ball drafts you can get into now, just because you can take advantage of these low rankings before they creep up.
Yep, absolutely. DK Metcalf, wide receiver 23, 6th in red zone targets, which equated to 8 total touchdowns, 10th in deep targets. He was the wide receiver 22 in fantasy points per game with 14.1. He played in all but one game and finished as the wide receiver 21 overall. Coach, like we're all within 5 of each other. You are only 4 of each other. You're only 4 behind Coach. Coach is the highest at 20. You're the lowest at 24. Nate's at 22, and then myself, Wicked, and AJ all have him ranked as 23. So this means he's either going to be a high-end wide receiver 1 or a tail-end wide receiver 4, because that's the only way that we could all be wrong. So, But I did do a write-up on him that'll be on the website. I'm trying to save some time here and there. But since we're all pretty much right there, close to consensus, that's low-end wide receiver 2. If I can get him as my low-end wide receiver 2, especially if I can find something really consistent with my wide receiver 1, then I'll be happy with it.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is when I first looked, after I did my rankings, when I first went back and looked at all of them, I looked at a couple guys. He was one of the guys I looked at, and I thought I was a little low on him, just because ever since his rookie year, he's been consistently a wide receiver 2 or better every single season. But then I started looking a little closer, and was kind of what was in my head when I was doing the rankings was ever since that second year, where he finished 7th overall, and he hasn't fell a ton, but consistently each year he's kind of fell back every single season. And the big thing for me last season were his targets and receptions took a massive hit. He had the lowest of his career with 119 targets and 66 receptions. And the previous 3 seasons, he was averaging 133 targets and just under 83 receptions. And
wild.
I think it kind of goes along with what you had up there with them figuring out that Seattle and DK particularly struggles against the zone. So I just fear we're at the point now we're going to see a low end to DK instead of his potential of being that top end receiver.
Yeah, and since you mentioned it, I did talk about the struggles against the zone, but also a lot of that could have been that Russell Wilson and Geno Smith's stats both also drop against the zone. So yeah, there is potential there that they're the reason that he was struggling against the zone, statistically speaking. And Sam Howell comes in; he's possibly going to get a shot here to be the QB1. We'll see. We'll see what they do there in Seattle, but then also. I believe I had. Another thing I want to consider is Tyler Lockett looked like he was done last season, but he also had some injuries. He's had a few injuries the last couple seasons. He's older now. Do we think that he's actually done? And then I looked at our stats and where we have him ranked, not our stats, our rankings list, and we have him as a consensus wide receiver 49. So I think in the opinion of those of us on the panel, he's done. So if that's the case, that's also going to help DK. But yeah, again, just solid wide receiver 2, in my opinion. He's just not consistent enough to be that wide receiver 1.
Yeah. Yep.
Devonta Smith is our wide receiver 24, 16th in receptions with 81, 20th in receiving yards with 1,066, 7 total touchdowns, 14.2 fantasy points per game was 20th. And then he played in 16 games and finished as the wide receiver 19 overall. Mark, you were the highest on him at 21, and Nate was the lowest at 27. So another guy that we're all real close on. Wicked and AJ have him at 22, Coach at 23, and I have him at 25. For me, this one's a quick write-up. I had Devonta as my wide receiver 2 or 3 in many of my redraft leagues last season. Overall, I was pleased, but when he was bad, it was really bad. 5 games in single digits isn't ideal for your wide receiver 2 in redraft, and one of those was championship week, which kind of left a bitter memory. Putting recency bias aside, I'm also concerned about the arrival of Saquon Barkley. I feel quarterback Jalen Hurts' attempts will go down. Barkley's ability to play from the slot and a great receiving back in the dump-off game as well. I think that we're going to see a lot more designed passes that go to Barkley, which is going to take away from Smith's target share. So there's just a lot of different things there that kind of concern me about Devonta Smith necessarily taking a step upward, but I don't really see him going back a whole lot either. But that's why I have him right there at that high-end wide receiver 3. I think that the inconsistency might be worse because of the arrival of Barkley, but the good games could potentially be even better.
Yeah. So I personally love Devonta this year. I think Kellen Moore is going to be a huge addition for that offense. There's already talk of there being a lot more freedom within the offense, the players being able to do things they weren't allowed to do last year. I think Smith was actually the one quoted saying they have the opportunity to win how they want to win against coverage. So I think you're going to see a lot more one-on-one matchups created for Smith, leading to a lot more deep balls than we've been seeing. And I think the offense is going to open up for Hurts a little more. I think it's going to be more of a spread offense that we're going to see, kind of like what he played with in Oklahoma.
Yeah, there you go. And that quote right there, win how we want to win, is pretty much just saying we're not going to let the coaching staff get us down anymore. They're going to let the players go out there and play, and they're probably better off for it because those players know football a lot better than Sirianni does. So good on them for doing the right thing. Like I if they stick with that, then Sirianni might actually get to keep his job. Let's see. Deebo Samuels is number 25, 9th in yards after the catch with 527. And what was on only 60 receptions. So he had 527 yards after the catch on only 60 receptions. He only had 892 total receiving yards, which was 32nd in the league. So number 1 in fantasy points per target and number 2 in fantasy points per route run, 4th in total touchdowns with 12. So he scored a lot of touchdowns and he got a lot of yards after the catch. 16.2 fantasy points per game was 12th in the league, making him a low-end wide receiver 1 on any given week. He played in 15 games, finishing as the wide receiver 15 overall. I'm the highest on him at 15, as if it wasn't clear by how excited I got talking about his stats. Wickett is the lowest at 31, which I can totally see. Like this is one of those volatile players that I could really see a lot of different outcomes for. So I'm not even mad about this one. But AJ was 21. You were 22. Coach and Nate were both at 26, closest to the consensus. For me, it's simple math. I believe firmly that Ayuk will not be a 49er when the season starts, or he'll be one of those guys that we see every year that sits out and finally gets a deal just before the season starts, and he has some soft tissue injury issues or to deal with the start of the season, and it just kind of lingers, or maybe he's sitting out and not properly conditioning on his own. But either way, with Debo without Ayuk on the field equates to incredible top-end wide receiver 1 numbers. He could easily be a top 5 wide receiver if Ayuk isn't there. The Niners drafted Ricky Purcell, but he's going to be a rookie. And while he is capable of running the ball as well, I'm talking about Purcell, he's very capable of running the ball as well. I think they will likely use him more in that traditional wide receiving position. Worst case, Ayuk does stay with the 49ers, and you spend a 4th round pick on Debo as your wide receiver 2, and he finishes as a wide receiver 2, and it still isn't a bad pick. So not a league winner, but not a bust either. Aside from injuries, there is no chance Debo is a bust at where you're going to take him. He's probably one of the most consistent wide receiver 2s on the board at worst case scenario. So that's why I have him as one of my top end wide receiver 2s. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, so I mean, it's basically the same exact conversation we had with Ayuk in a past couple shows. You have Debo, you have Ayuk, you have Kittle, and then you have their best player, CMC. I think, to me, it's clear Debo is not going anywhere. And I would even say I'm pretty sure Ayuk's not either. But what we don't know is if Ayuk's going to play, if he doesn't get the bag he's looking for. So if Ayuk sits out, obviously that's a huge boost to Debo's value. So I'm actually right with you on the rankings now, because what I'm doing is I'm flopping Debo and Ayuk, and I think I had Ayuk at 16. So I'll drop him down to where Debo is now, and I'm putting Debo up at 16, just because in my eyes, there's more of an opportunity for a holdout than there is for either of them getting traded. So I think if we're going to take a risk that either of them gets a boost to their value, it's going to be Debo.
And for what it's worth, Brock Purdy is saying that his first real solid full offseason that he's had in a while, he feels like he's improved quite a bit this offseason. So usually players aren't going to put that kind of a target on their back unless they're pretty confident in it. So obviously being a starting quarterback in the NFL is going to make you confident, but just I know it's just words and it's just June 11th and all that, but definitely something to talk about. No, we haven't talked about Higgins yet. That's if we keep going at this rate, we'll talk about him by the time kickoff of week 1 happens. So no, not your boy Higgins just yet, but he is on the list. We'll see if we can get to him. What's our time? We're at 48 minutes. I don't know that we'll be able to get to the breakdown, but I'm hoping. We'll see what we can get through here. Zay Flowers, 26th in target. This is our wide receiver number 26 on the consensus. He was 26th in targets, 20th in target share, 28th in red zone targets, 21st in deep targets, and 22nd in receptions. 33rd in yards with 858, but 15th in yards after the catch with 391, making big plays. His 12.9 fantasy points per game was good for 31st in the league, and he played in 16 games, finishing as the wide receiver 31 overall. I was the highest on him, and admittedly, it's because I had him in several leagues last year, and I was pretty pleased when he was on the field, and I enjoyed watching him play, so I might be a little bit biased here, but I was the highest at 22, but we were all really close on this one as well. I think this is another one that seems like a pretty safe bet for a low-end wide receiver 2, high end wide receiver 3, where we have him at consensus. Wicked and Nate were the lowest at 28. Mark, you were right there with them at 27, Coach at 25, and AJ at 24. So pretty much I'm going to summarize my write up here in that he played a lot better towards the end of the season than he did at the beginning. He showed real progression throughout his rookie season. And then I know I said something about the addition of Derrick Henry, which is sure to help open up more passing lanes for Lamar Jackson. And finally, considering the jump he is likely to make from having another NFL offseason. So what I mean by that is, simply put, like, Lamar and Henry may be able to just do whatever they want to in that rushing game. So that might take away from opportunities and targets from Zay Flowers, but the targets that he does get should be way more efficient, which is also going to be very helpful for Lamar, in my opinion. But so that's why I'm the highest on him. But you're next to the lowest. But again, we're all right there together. What do you have to add?
Yeah, I'm just never going to be a guy you can convince Lamar is going to be a top passer and utilize his receivers like top receivers like they should be. They're always going to be a run first team that utilizes their tight ends very heavily as long as he's there. And now they're adding, like you said, they're adding Derrick Henry to the mix. Like, I don't know if a wide receiver is going to score a single touchdown this season. Obviously, I'm kidding there, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm just always going to be too low on my rankings on Baltimore wide receivers, especially with the hype that Flowers has. Like, there's a lot of people out there that like him, and they should. I just don't think he's going to get the opportunities he needs to truly flourish.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think you're too low at 27. I mean, we're all right there together. So I think it's a pretty fair ranking. It's definitely a fair opinion until Lamar actually shows it. It's hard not to believe it. Let's see, Tank Dell, Houston wide receiver, our wide receiver 27. 45th in receiving yards with 709, 21st in yards per target and yards per reception, and 7 total touchdowns. He was 18th in fantasy points per game with 15 and played in 11 games, finishing as the wide receiver 39 overall. I'm the highest on him by quite a bit at 19. And then it was Wicked at 24, Nate at 25, AJ 27. So those three were all right there together, close to our consensus. Mark, you had him at 35, so you were way back on him. And then Coach was even lower on him than you are at 39. So I can let you go first on this one since we're so polarizing. I think we both need to kind of discuss our feelings on this one. So Tank Dell, why are you so low on him compared to the rest of us?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. There's just too many guys ahead of him in the pecking order for me to feel comfortable that he's going to finish as a wide receiver 2 or better. I mean, you got Nico and Diggs, who are clearly the A1, A2 in my mind. So he's third in the pecking order already as far as wide receivers go. And now you're adding Mixon to the list, which that's another person he's got to contend with for touches. And his, like you mentioned before, early ADP, but his current ADP has him as the 22nd wide receiver off the board. And for me, that's just way too early to draft a guy who's already got 3 guys ahead of him in touches in my mind. So that's where I'm at.
That's fair, but in my mind, I think that having those other guys helps him. So my reason for such a high ranking is simple. Last season, his best games were when he faced subpar DBs. His worst games were against some of the better DBs in the league. Makes sense, right? Like, duh. So with the addition of Stephon Diggs, the opposing defense will now have to decide which wide receiver they want to try to shut down each week because you can't stop them all. So Dell will have weeks where he will straight up win you games. In my opinion, he's going to have games where he goes up against that chump backup DB that's getting the start because of injuries. and he has to face Tank Dell. So the downside is that he is highly inconsistent, and while I like his explosiveness, his efficiency is also really bad. So I have him listed as a mid-level wide receiver 2, but I'm only taking him there if I'm completely confident in my wide receiver 1 being consistently good. If not, then I'm going to hope that my league mates also have him as low as my fellow rankers here at T2T have him ranked, so that I can steal him as my top end wide receiver 3, especially considering the added injury risk with the small stature as an NFL wide receiver. We got to meet him at the Senior Bowl and interview him down there a couple years ago, and he's not a very big guy. Like, I was the smallest guy on my high school football team, and I'm pretty sure that our sizes were pretty comparable. So yeah, he's definitely a small guy. So the small stature also kind of scares me as well. But also, if I look at my my rankings, I've got for Nico Collins, I have him ranked 12th on my list, and for Diggs, I have him 24th. Okay, so so that means I have Tank Dell listed in the middle, but I'm really low on Diggs. I've been saying it for the past season. The previous season didn't. That's when I got out. Whenever I saw him 2 seasons ago, that's when I started getting out on Diggs. I was glad last season that I got out on him. Now he's in an explosive offense. He's gonna get a lot of looks, which is gonna make him happy. But he doesn't have to be the guy either in that offense. So they're not gonna heavily utilize him a lot. So I'm kind of down on Diggs, and that's probably why I'm higher on Dell than you guys. So, and also I know that's not a popular opinion.
Yeah. No, I think all that's fair. I mean, Tank's not going to like completely disappear to be unheard of. And I think you're right that he is going to have some games that are going to win you weeks. For me, I don't know if he's going to have enough of those games to counteract the weeks where Nico and Diggs are getting everything.
So the next guy, Keenan Allen, before we talk about his stats and everything, did you see the clip from OTAs, Keenan Allen catching a pass from Caleb Williams in practice?
Where he's called Caleb out and said, hell no, or something like that.
Yeah. It was just a bad pass. Lobbed it way up. He had to almost stop to get the ball. And it wasn't a drill where they even had a defender on him. It was just a shakeoff drill at the very front of the route. You blow past the guy, and then the guy with the bag stands there and waits for the next receiver. And there was nobody actually guarding him. And Keenan goes, as the ball's getting there, he's like, "Oh, hell no." Like, come on, rookie. We need to talk. All right, but anyhow, Keenan Allen, 10th in targets, 3rd in target share, and 3rd in fantasy points per game with 21.5. He finished 5th in receptions with 108 and 11th in receiving yards with 1,243. He played in 13 games, finishing as the wide receiver 8 overall. So he only played in 13 games and still finishes the wide receiver 8 overall. Long story short, I'm kind of low on him here. I'm almost the lowest, and it's because he no longer plays for the Chargers. He's not going to get a ton of attention, not going to get a ton of targets in the Bears offense, where he's at best the 2nd best wide receiver, and they have a rookie wide receiver that they're going to be pulling along that's super talented, also taken in the 1st round. So they have a lot of crazy good talent there, and to me, DJ Moore is still the guy there. And also like I said, the targets are going to be way down compared to what he had with the Chargers. So that's why for me, he's more of a high-end wide receiver 3, in my opinion. But Mark, you were way higher on him at 19. So what do you like about Keenan this year?
Yes, sir. Keep doubting the old man. Keep doubting him. I'll take him all day long.
I'm not doubting the old man. I'm doubting his situation and his quarterback.
Well, for me, it's like if Keenan Allen isn't a top 20 wide receiver this year, it's because one of 2 things. He got hurt or Caleb Williams was a bust. Those are the only 2 scenarios in my mind that Keenan Allen isn't a top 20 wide receiver. Like you mentioned, 13 games last season, he still finished as the 8th overall receiver. I think one thing we can agree on is Keenan Allen is a target monster. And there's a reason for that, because all his quarterbacks love him. He's a big body that gets open and he gets to the right places at the right time. That's not going to change with Caleb as a rookie quarterback. He's going to be looking for that exact stability. I think what we were just talking about is part to that point where Keenan's not going to be afraid to get in his ear and tell him what he needs to hear, and he's going to be there with him the whole way. So if he's coming off the board at 28 or later, like it seems, there's not going to be many drafts I don't come out of with him on my team. The upside is massive to where he's going. And like I said, 2 scenarios: injury or Caleb Williams is a bust. I don't think there's many in the community that think Caleb Williams is going to come out as a bust. So, I mean, it's possible, but that's not what it's looking like. And number 2, anybody can get hurt. Let's see if he stays healthy.
So you still think he's going to be a target monster?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So here's the board bet for you. Keenan Allen, I don't know what it is that his average targets per game is, but let's say over the last 4 years, whatever Keenan Allen's target rate has been per game over the last 4 years, he's not going to get 80% of that with Chicago.
Well, why don't we just do the one we know you love? We'll do Keenan Allen versus DJ Moore. I think Keenan Allen.
That's even easier. Then I don't have to do math.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's perfect. You're that low on DJ Moore?
I'm not that low on DJ Moore. I'm high on Keenan Allen. Right?
So Keenan Allen,
I have him as my 19th overall wide receiver. Where do I have DJ Moore? Probably a little behind there.
You have him at 18. So you're right there.
So I need
you easily, yeah,
but
you
right
easily
there.
can
I have
swap
them.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. That's easy, and that's a lot easier to do the math when we go to figure it up too. So, all right, let's see. Wide receiver 29, Jaden Reed. This one is intriguing to me. That whole entire Green Bay Packers wide receiving core is intriguing to me. And for what it's worth, Jordan Love came out today and said that he doesn't think that the Packers need a wide receiver 1 because they're just going to play the hot hand, and whoever it is that week, depending on scheme, that's who's going to get the ball. That also scares me because it already kind of confirms what I was thinking to begin with. So 40th in targets, but 21st in deep targets and 14th in red zone targets. So they were targeting him when it mattered more than they were targeting him the rest of the game. But it resulted in the 5th most touchdowns with 10. He finished 26th in fantasy points per game with 13.6 and played in 16 games, ending as the wide receiver 25 overall. If you get 10 touchdowns in a game, you should finish higher than 26th overall in fantasy points per game and 25th overall in the season, even with having one less game. So aside from those deep balls and the red zone, they really did not utilize him enough. And that inconsistency level is enough to keep him out of my wide receiver 2 range. But also he's got another year under his belt. He's actually, more of a potential veteran. I don't know what year you'd want to call them veterans. I know the NFL consider them veterans at year 2. I kind of look at it more like year 3, but still room for improvement. So I do think that maybe he improves on those numbers, but not enough for me to be super confident in him just yet.
Yeah. So for me, my ranking's as low as it is just because I don't know if I'm sure he's the top wide receiver there. I think, like you were saying, I think it's going to be split all around. I mean, if you look at the playoffs, I don't. Did he get hurt in the Cowboys game, or was he just non-existent in that game?
I don't remember.
I don't remember him getting hurt, but he didn't. Stat-wise, he had nothing compared to Dobbs, who had a huge game. So I think we're going to see a lot of inconsistency from all of their receivers. And I also think with Josh Jacobs coming into town, Love's going to see quite a bit of touchdown regression. So that's just less to go around for all the receivers.
All right. Yeah, no, he did play in that game because he had 3 targets, and one of the targets was in the red zone. He just had a 0 stat line. So because he didn't catch anything. He had Stephon Gilmore on him for that game as well. And that was a run-heavy game. If you remember, Jones and Dillon tore it up, especially Jones. He had a hell of a game that game. Let's see. Our wide receiver 30 is George Pickens. And I am at consensus at ranking him at 30th. AJ's 31st. Wicked is 32nd. Nate is 29. Mark is 28. And Coach was 27. So we were literally 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, and 32 on ranking him. So pretty close altogether. It's only a difference of 5 spots. But let's see, 10th in deep targets, 16th in receiving yards and yards after the catch with 1,140 and 308 yards after the catch. He only had 5 touchdowns, first in the league in yards per reception with 18.1 and 5th in yards per target. He played in 17 games, finishing as the wide receiver 30 overall and the wide receiver 36 in fantasy points per game at 12.3. So I'm at the consensus here, and I really thought I would be a little bit higher than consensus. So I may need to adjust my rankings just a little bit to help ensure that I get more shares of Pickens. The talent is absolutely there, in my opinion. He was only 2 touchdowns away from finishing as the wide receiver 16 overall. And in his first 2 seasons, he went from 52 catches for 801 yards and 4 touchdowns on 85 targets to 63 catches, 1,140 yards and 5 touchdowns on 106 targets. Now he is due for his true third-year breakout with improved quarterback play and a better team around him. He is highly likely to improve into wide receiver 15 range with relative ease. He is a guy that I fully expect to see in the top 10 by the end of the season if he remains healthy, and a few other wide receivers suffer injuries. I wanted Pickens as a high upside, low risk wide receiver 3, and I didn't put in my explanation here. Also, the whole Deontay Johnson thing, he's not there anymore, so targets are going to go way up. But I wanted to put in my explanation for why I have him ranked so low after I've been talking so highly of him. And to put it simply, with his current quarterback situation, even though it's worlds better than what he had last season, no matter which quarterback they go with, it's still he's still getting drafted so crazy low. I'm probably going to have to adjust my rankings on him to adjust him up to be able to actually get him by the time the season starts. But right now he's going so late in drafts that I can put him as my wide receiver 30 and still get him in nearly every draft with no problem. By the time the season starts, I'm probably going to have to put him in there at probably around 22 to 25. That's where I see his ADP being by the time we get towards actual redraft season when we're doing our redraft drafts. 22 to 25 will probably be his ADP, so I'm going to have to bump him up to 20 to get him. But I could probably see myself doing that just because I really think he's going to have a huge year this year.
Yeah, so this one's very interesting to me because I do feel like Pickens has a very high ceiling. And with Deontay Johnson leaving, he was the only receiver there. They did draft Roman Wilson. I think Wilson will help out where it's not just they can throw everybody on Pickens and be not worry about anybody else. So I do think he still has plenty of opportunities in that offense. And the thing that kind of surprises me, and I'm probably looking at it, I'm probably going to bring his rankings up a little higher, is I feel like I'm not the biggest Russell Wilson guy, but like I feel like he's getting a really bad rap for last year that he doesn't deserve. I thought he played pretty well last year. That team was a hot mess. And the shit he was getting from Peyton throughout the season, like a lot of it was unwarranted during the games. Like, I don't know. I feel like he's still a good quarter. Like, do you think he loses that job at all next year? Like, I was having a talk with somebody where they think it's
No.
dead on conclusion that Fields is going to be playing before the season is over. And I don't see that. Like, I don't
No,
see.
I think Fields might bring another dynamic to the game, but I think overall, especially just game knowledge and game IQ, Wilson has been there. He's done it, and he's had great seasons. At the very least, they're going to give him an opportunity, and that team is a much better team than what he had last year. Just like you were saying, like it wasn't him that was bad; it was the team that was bad,
Yeah.
and then he didn't help. But if he's got a good team around him, I think he's going to show enough that there's no way that they can justify benching him. I mean, it's we already said it earlier. It's a Mike Tomlin led team, so he's definitely not going to drop below 500. So
Yeah.
as long as he can still win some games, they're going to be happy enough, and they can't justify benching a guy. I mean, he'd have to play really bad, and that defense be bailing them out or something for them to justify it, because they can still win games with that team around them.
I mean, would they have 10 wins last year with Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph? Like, what shows anybody to think that Russell Wilson is going to play better, like worse than they did?
Right.
I think he'll be a fine standing quarterback for them this year. And I think if things happen, to me, it's going to come down to how their offensive line plays. If they improve the offensive line, I think the ceiling is super high for all of them. But if they don't, they could be in trouble.
Yeah, and they did do some work on that offensive line in the
Yeah.
offseason, including in the draft. So they're definitely looking to make some moves there for sure.
Yeah.
We are going to read off the next two. Christian Kirk is our wide receiver 31, and then we got to get to number 32. He's the most polarizing wide receiver at the Toilets to Titles network, so we got to get to number 32. Then after that, I'm just going to read off the last 8. We're not going to give any particular stats or numbers or anything like that, but you guys will be able to see all of the rankings on our website, toiletstotitles.com, in just a couple of days, because after tonight's show, I'm going to send this to our editor, and he's going to look it over and correct all of our spelling and grammar issues. And that's our man, Joey, and he'll be posting it on the website within the next couple of days. But our wide receiver number 31 is Christian Kirk, Jacksonville, 14th most slot snaps at 67.4%. The rest of his stats were very mediocre across the board. They were just screaming wide receiver 3 stats. He was 33rd in fantasy points per game and played in 12 games, finishing as the wide receiver 47 overall. Nate was at the consensus at 31, and I was below that at 33. Wicked was the lowest at 34. AJ and Coach were at 30 right there at consensus, and then you were just a tick higher at 26. You have Christian Kirk ranked as kind of a mid-level wide receiver 3 there. So why don't you go ahead and talk about that, and then I'll explain why I was so down on him after that.
Yeah, so like I want to have Kirk as a wide receiver too, but for the reasons you pointed out, like he's more of a wide receiver 3. The reason I have him higher than you guys do, I think, is just because my thoughts are they got worse at receiver. So they got rid of Calvin Ridley, and they brought in Gabe Davis and the rookie Brian Thomas. I like Brian Thomas, but I just feel like the targets are going to be there for Kirk. Him and Lawrence obviously had a rapport together. It seemed like Ingram's season took the uptick after like Kirk went down. So I still think he's going to be the number 1 guy there. And if Trevor's ever going to break out, like Kirk needs to ascend too. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and I heard a podcast today. I went grocery shopping, so I had a little bit of time in the car, and I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember who it was. It might have been the Fantasy Footballers, but they were talking about how when it comes to Trevor Lawrence, there were so many stats where he was just like 1 or 2 like potential notches away from going from being this low-end QB2 to being a low-end QB1 in nearly every single stat, which would have ultimately made him like a mid-level QB1. And there were several plays where it would be like a wide open wide receiver that just happened to drop the ball. And that one play alone would have put him over this threshold or that threshold. Like, in other words, like Trevor Lawrence really didn't look as bad as what his number line showed that he was. So you do have potential here in what you're saying, where if he can take a step up and they can make a few less mistakes here and there, then maybe Christian Kirk is the guy that gets the extra little bit out of that. But for me personally, if we throw out statistically his worst season of his career, which was his rookie season, then Kirk has averaged as the wide receiver 33 in fantasy points per game, and that's throwing out the worst year. So any given year over his 5-year career, it's wide receiver 33. That's a low end wide receiver 3 average. His best year was as a wide receiver 18 in fantasy points per game. And that was 2 years ago when he was considered the wide receiver 1 for the team whenever he only had Zay Jones to contend with at the wide receiver position. So he ended up being almost an even split between the two of them. They were more like the wide receiver 1A and 1B. But now he will have a better version of Zay Jones to contend with Gabe Davis being there, because I think he's better than Zay Jones personally, and a talented rookie in Brian Thomas, just as you mentioned. So also, as I stated above, Kirk ran from the slot on 67.4% of his snaps last season with the Jaguars and 52% in 2022. So he's really utilized as the slot guy, even if he's listed as a wide receiver 1 for that week. They just love to utilize him out of the slot. So I simply can't see a true slot wide receiver in a 3-way split for targets. And I do think that it'll be a little bit closer to 3-way than what I feel you believe with Thomas there. I don't think it'll be a true 3-way split, but I think Thomas gets enough that I can't have him better than a low end wide receiver 3 for me personally.
See, for me, I'm a little more worried about Gabe Davis than I am Brian Thomas.
Yeah, I think that one's going to be more of a true split.
Yeah.
All right, T. Higgins.
The one I was forgetting about. I didn't mention that he left too. I was trying to think of the second guy.
Yeah. T. Higgins for Cincinnati, 16th in yards per reception with 15.6 and tied for 6th in drops. He finished as the wide receiver 40 in fantasy points per game and played in 12 games, finishing as the wide receiver 51 overall. Now, Mark, you're the highest on him, and you and I have had conversations. You and I and Wicked have had conversations on T. Higgins and his abilities or inabilities in this up-and-coming season. But you have him ranked at 23rd. I'm clearly the lowest at 46, and I'm 11 lower than the next lowest, which is Wicked and Nate. And Wicked's high on him. He's the one that I have a couple of board bets with on T. Higgins. I think I have one with you as well. But you're even higher than Wicked is, but I'm 11 down from that. Coach is right there close to consensus at 33 and AJ at 28. So here's my thoughts. If you still want to pretend that Joe Burrow will be 100%, that's fine. Joe Burrow in 2024, you're fooling yourself. That's whatever. That's fine. The injury he sustained last season to that wrist simply won't allow him to be 100%. Joe Burrow for at least a couple of seasons, if ever. But let's play make-believe and say that he will. Higgins' best season so far was 2021 with a healthy Joe Burrow, and that's what everyone wants to consider when we think about ranking Higgins. So let's roll with that season. And that season, Higgins had competition from Jamar Chase and edged out Tyler Boyd for the second best overall production on the team. On any given week, Higgins' average being the wide receiver 32 overall for that given week. So that was his overall average for any given week was wide receiver 32 on any given week. So that means if you're starting him, if you're drafting him as your wide receiver 2, you're getting wide receiver 3 rate, or you were getting wide receiver 3 rate numbers out of him that season. All right, he was wide receiver 3 or better in 9 games and completely unstartable in 5. And he had 4 games in single-digit scoring, but had 3 games where he scored more than 20. So he did have the high spike games, and that's why he finished, so high. But those unstartable games, when I say 5 unstartable games, what I mean is he's wide receiver 4 or worse. You don't want to start a guy that's going to finish wide receiver 4 that week, because that's the overall wide receiver 37 or worse. Wait, no. 40. So it'd be the wide receiver 49 or worst. He finishes the wide receiver 49 or worst in 5 games that year, where this is supposedly the year that we want to compare him to and say that he's going to be good again. So all of that to say that now without Tyler Boyd, he should see a bump in targets. I get that. But even with the increased target share, he is way too inconsistent to rely on even as a wide receiver 3. But if you draft like me and you go really late on wide receivers and you need one that could be that big hit potential, and you actually do think that Burrow will be back and healthy again and slinging it like he did a few years ago, and then the only part of Higgins' game that he's really good at, then he may be worth taking as part of taking as your wide receiver 3. But if I'm correct and Burrow's wrist prevents him from accurately slinging the ball down deep, then Higgins' numbers will be even worse, because, like I said, that was the part of Higgins' game that he was the best at. His numbers will be even worse than he was his best season, and he's going to finish as a mid-level wide receiver 3 on average any given week, and that's just not something that you want. I don't want to flex somebody that averages mid-level wide receiver 3 any given week. All right, I'll let you rebut.
First of all, Wicked, where are you at? Shame on you. Shame on you.
Oh, gotcha.
Shame on you to not be here during this conversation, and then after all the Higgins talk, put a 35 up next to his name in your rankings. But I get it. I get it. There's Wicked's rankings are wide receivers who haven't played in the NFL yet or have played 2 years. They all got to be up there. Like any young guys, he's got to have up there. So it's bringing everybody else down. I get it. But no, for me, so I'm a pretender. I'm living in fantasy land. I believe Burrow's going to be playing every game next year. So let's just get that out there. And that's where my ranking's based on. The 2 years that Burrow has been healthy, Higgins has been a wide receiver too. And that's I to be fair, I have him at 23, which is barely in the wide receiver 2 conversation. Yeah. But if Burrow's healthy, I believe he finishes there. I mean, the last time Burrow played 10 games, the next 2 seasons, he was a top 10 quarterback. So now he played 10 games. We got 2 more seasons coming now. I don't know. I'm trusting Burrow plays the season. If he doesn't, Higgins won't be a wide receiver too. If he does, I think he'll be there.
And I agree with that. I really do agree with that. If Burrow is Burrow, 100%, I agree with you. He will finish as a wide receiver too, for sure. So let's see. And I was going to comment on, and you're giving Wicked a hard time about his T. Higgins ranking whenever I made the side bet with them that Jerry Jeudy would outscore T. Higgins. And then I went back and looked at my rankings after I made them, and I've got T. Higgins at 46th, and I have Jerry Jeudy at 45. So I made it sound like he was going to blow him out of the water, but obviously I think they both stink.
Yeah.
All right, we're not gonna do a read or a rundown of like stats and numbers for the rest of the top 40, but I do want to give out the top 40. So I'm gonna read them off real quick, and then keep in mind next week we're gonna be back to talk tight ends. And if we can get through the tight ends quick enough, we might do some kickers and team defense, but most likely I'm gonna leave that for the website. Probably next week will be the last week of our series of our early redraft rankings. So, yeah, I agree. He was a bummer, and now going to Cleveland, who knows what's going to happen there. Although Amari Cooper is sitting out, he wants a contract, bigger contract. He's already overpaid, but he wants more money. So,
but I mean, if you want Judy to succeed, you got to rely on Deshaun Watson then. So
yeah, that's not happening either. Who's their backup now? The Jameson Winston, right?
Jameson Winston, yeah.
There you go. Jameson Winston to Jerry Judy. That's going to be the combo I'm rooting for. All right. So just quickly reading off the rest of these wide receivers to our top 40. We've got number 33, Calvin Ridley. Number 34 is Rashee Rice. And I'm actually on the wrong list. Here we go. Number 35 is Terry McLaurin. 36 is Chris Godwin. 37 is Rome Odunze. 38 is Deontay Johnson. An interesting thing about that one, we all have him ranked between 37, 38, and 39. All six of us have him ranked there. So that was kind of funny. Jordan Addison is ranked number 39 for us, and DeAndre Hopkins is our wide receiver 40. Just quick honorable mention, since we talked about him a moment ago, we do have Brian Thomas at 41. But all of those redraft rankings for wide receivers and all of the positions that we've done so far will be on the site in the next couple of days. You can already go back and look at all the other positions. They're already up there. But, yeah, that's
it's
pretty much
crazy just looking at that. Patrick Mahomes only has one receiver in the top 40, which is Rashee Rice, who barely made it in there.
And Travis Kelce.
Well, yeah, Kelce will be in there, but for receiver-wise, yeah. Very interesting.
I'm kind of excited about the tight end talk for next week, but I do want to say there was one thing I saw on the tight ends. Yeah, so if you're still watching Wicked, I think you might want to go back and update. You set your rankings a long time ago, and I appreciate that. But Darren Waller has officially retired, so you should probably take him off that list.
Maybe he's a fan of his music career.
Oh yeah, maybe that takes off. He might. That's a whole nother fantasy world. So, all right, Mark, man. Anything on our way out?
No, fun as always.
All right, guys, go back and check our last Fun Day draft. We drafted our dinner that we were serving to our guests that we could draft any guest 3 weeks ago. And then this past weekend, we drafted the dinner that we're going to serve to those guests. I need you to go back and watch it, and watch specifically for my team and George's team, because we're the two that are in the finals in the Twitter poll. So check out which meal you think is the best, and whether it's me or not, vote for me, because I'll be posting that poll maybe here in just a little bit or first thing in the morning. But just vote for me. Don't vote for George. We don't want to vote for George. But you all have a great night. Thanks for tuning in.